Fighters from a new border security force under the command of Syrian Democratic Forces (SDF) hold their weapons during a graduation ceremony in Hasaka, northeastern Syria, January 20, 2018. Roddy Side Reuters. Beirut, Syria and Russia condemned America's military presence in Syria as illegal on Thursday after an overnight confrontation in which U.S. warplanes bombed pro-Syrian government forces as they approached a U.S.-supported base. U.S. forces targeted the pro-government troops with airstrikes and artillery after they launched an attack against a base belonging to the U.S.-backed Syrian Democratic Forces in the eastern province of Deir al-Zour, according to Col. Thomas F. Veal, a U.S. military spokesman. He said U.S. military personnel advising the Kurdish-held SDF were at the base at the time. The Syrian government accused the United States of aggression in launching the strikes, which it said killed scores of people. Russia denounced the U.S. presence in Syria as illegal, and accused the United States of seeking to seize Syria's oil. The recent incident once again shows that the United States' illegal military presence in Syria is actually aimed at taking control of the country's economic assets and not at fighting against the ISIS international terror group, the Russian Defense Ministry said in a statement, referring to the Islamic State. There were no U.S. casualties, and one SDF fighter was injured, the U.S. military said. It was the most serious clash involving the United States and Syria since U.S. troops began deploying to northeastern Syria in late 2015 in support of Kurdish and Arab fighters against the Islamic State. It illustrated the complexity of the battlefield now that the war against the extremist group is winding down, leaving the United States in overall control of roughly a quarter of Syria. A deconfliction line establishing the Euphrates River as the divide between the United States and its SDF allies on one side and Russia and its Syrian government allies on the other was negotiated between the U.S. and Russian militaries last year, and until now it has served to mostly keep the rival armies apart. The Syrian government and its ally Iran have repeatedly called for U.S. troops to leave Syria now that the fight against the Islamic State is over, and they have regularly threatened to wage war to push the Americans out if they do not leave. But the Trump administration announced a new Syria strategy last month that envisages U.S. troops remaining in eastern Syria until there is a peace settlement to the wider war that includes a transition away from the rule of President Bashar al-Assad. With no sign of a peace deal in sight, the U.S. military is now committed to a potentially indefinite presence in Syria that is opposed by all the region's powers. The prospect that U.S. troops will remain in Syria while shoring up Kurdish efforts to secure self-rule has provoked a convergence among countries opposed to any form of Kurdish autonomy, uniting Turkey, Russia, Iran and the Syrian government in a de facto alliance against the U.S. presence. The United States is now in mission creep mode, said Robert Ford, a former U.S. ambassador to Syria who is now a senior fellow at the Middle East Institute. The Americans have managed through their diplomatic strategy to isolate themselves to the point where Turkey, Iran and Syria all agree that what the U.S. is doing in Syria is bad, he said. The attack on the southernmost flank of the SDF-controlled area in northeastern Syria came as Turkey pressed ahead with its nearly two-week-old offensive against the Kurdish enclave of Afrin in northwestern Syria. The enclave is controlled by the same Kurdish force that dominates the SDF, but it does not have direct U.S. support. Turkey has also been threatening to attack the U.S.-backed forces farther east, around the town of Manbij, where U.S. troops mount regular patrols. The attack in Deir al-Zour coincided with a visit by Lieutenant Gen. Paul Funk, commander of U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria, to the front lines in Manbij, where he offered assurances to the SDF of U.S. support. The Kurdish-led force is feeling increasingly under attack from all sides, said Kino Gabriel, a spokesman for the SDF in northeastern Syria. This is an attack on the political project we are trying to establish in Syria. If the tensions persist, the SDF and its U.S. military advisors could soon find themselves fighting a war on three fronts, against Turkey, the Islamic State and the Syrian government alliance. But, Gabriel said, the SDF is confident that the force has enough fighters both to confront the Turkish incursion and hold its lines in Deir al-Zour. He said the attack on the SDF base was conducted by members of the National Defense Force, a Syrian militia that is loyal to the Syrian government and has received arms and supplies from Iran and the Lebanese Hezbollah movement. The likely goal, he said, was to attempt to halt any more SDF advances farther east, where only a few Islamic State-held villages lie between SDF positions in the Iraqi border. We assume it is because they want to divert our attention from the ongoing operations against Daesh in the Euphrates Valley, he said, using an Arabic acronym for the Islamic State. We only have a few more towns and villages to be cleared of ISIS. They are completely surrounded, and we are just waiting to finish our operations and clear the Iraqi-Syrian border. Veal, the U.S. military spokesman, said the hostilities erupted after several hundred infantry forces backed by tanks and artillery began advancing on an SDF position in the town of Kishim, about 5 miles east of the deconfliction line. It lies near some of Syria's biggest oil fields that are currently under SDF control, and he speculated that the pro-government forces were trying to take them back. And the advancing forces unleashed a volley of 20 to 30 tank and artillery rounds toward the base. U.S. warplanes and artillery struck back, Veal said in an emailed statement. This action was taken in self-defense, he said. Channels of communication between the U.S. military and Russia remained open throughout the Thursday night clash, Veal said, and the Americans informed Russia before they opened fire on the pro-government force. The Russian Defense Ministry, however, said the battle occurred when a reconnaissance party made up of Syrian militias ventured across the Euphrates River to hunt down an Islamic State position, only to be attacked unprovoked by U.S. warplanes. The militias had neglected to inform the Russian military of their plan in advance, the Russian statement added.